I'm Fred Craven. I am the stage manager here at Harmonic, where we host FileMaker Pro Users Group every month on the first Friday of the month. Our next event is going to be September 4. Greg Price is going to be speaking on portable code. By the way, for all you people that are distant, we're having lunch today. You should come and join us on September 4. Let us know you're coming, and you can join lunch with us. Now, we're going to bring you one of our favorite sponsors, Mike from Zerowait.
Most IT teams view a VMware exit the same way they would oral surgery. Necessary, slightly terrifying, costly, and something they hope never happens again. In the last few months, I have had a root canal issue around the same time as we received our new VMware subscription rates. The pain of both kept me up at night. Out-of-control pain often drives actions that were unthinkable only a short time ago. At Zerowait, we're longtime FileMaker users who have used VMware, and we decided to extract ourselves from VMware and implant a Proxmox solution. We were so impressed that we became authorized Proxmox resellers to help our customers. If you are looking to upgrade your VM infrastructure, Zerowait will restore your smile. Zerowait will migrate your workloads to Proxmox on hardware that's ready for the next 5 years. Proxmox has options for data recovery that will make your CFO smile and keep the cyber insurance auditors from developing a nervous twitch. If your VMware renewal is coming up and you're upgrading FileMaker for AI, call us. We'll look at where you are today and where you want to be in 2027, then build a treatment plan that doesn't require anesthesia. Zerowait turns a once-in-a-career toothache into a quiet, maintainable business asset ready for whatever AI throws at your organization next. Ready for 2027? By the way, I know a great oral surgeon.
Now I'm good? All right. First, I want to take a moment to thank Linett Sikora for her beautiful art for this month's presentation. I have a hat very similar to that. I chose not to distract you with it this morning. All right. For any of you who are wondering why this says Elevate FM, it's because this is the presentation that I gave in Toronto last June for the 2026 Elevate FM conference, which was wonderful. I highly recommend it. Small group of people, one-track session, so no having to pick and choose which one you'd prefer to see and then step out because maybe you didn't. They were all great, and it was a wonderful 2 days. Okay, so that having been explained, here we go. All right, so welcome to my session on managing design thinking in real projects from user stories to QA. I'm Heather McCue. I'm a longtime fixture in the FileMaker community with all certifications from 7 forward. I've spent 21 years on the team here at Dallas-based Platinum member Harmonic Data and nearly 4 decades as a FileMaker developer. I proposed this particular topic because while working on my UX certification a few years back at SMU, I realized that while design thinking is absolutely applicable to FileMaker development, there was a distinct lack of representation for custom software development in the shared projects and tools. I happen to feel strongly that following the principles of design thinking will become increasingly essential to future business, future success, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to share it with you today. Now, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to take my turn here behind the mic to share something on a little more personal note. Some of you already know that I have a chronic condition known as gastroparesis, And August is Gastroparesis Awareness Month. The term gastroparesis comes from Latin, and it essentially translates to stomach paralysis, also known as delayed gastric emptying. The stomach empties food too slowly, in spite of there not being any blockage or physical reason for that being the case. People living with gastroparesis may experience persistent nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, weight loss, and in some cases, life-threatening malnutrition. I know someone who's been hospitalized a number of times for this. Symptoms usually occur during or after eating, so it has a significant impact on nutrition, employment, emotional well-being, and overall quality of life. And for this year's Gastroparesis Awareness Month, the International Foundation of Gastrointestinal Disorders, IFFGD, for those of you who didn't get all that, including myself, it launched its national awareness campaign, More Than Invisible, to educate the public, empower patients, and increase understanding of gastroparesis. For anyone who wants to learn more, you can go to aboutgastroparesis.org, and if you want to spread the word, increase awareness, use the hashtag #MoreThanInvisible. I recently learned from the Australian comedian, some of you may be familiar with her, Hannah Gadsby, that my success here is entirely dependent on your expectations. So, here's what I have in store for you today. I'm going to share why I care, and you should care, about design thinking. For those who are unfamiliar or in need of a refresher, I'll cover the core fundamentals. I will discuss what I consider to be the primary tools for transferring those core fundamentals into actionable development. I'll share my experience and the advantages of building our own tool to manage, document, and test the resulting features. I will also share a peek into my crystal ball for some of what I see in our future. All right then, let's get to it. I have a lot to cover in pretty short order, but like the little engine that could, I think I can. As we dive in, I'm going to start with a serious question for the group here today. Why do good features fail? The customer asked for it, and you delivered it, but the users aren't happy. Or worse, they may not even use it. Let's see if any of you can relate to either of these experiences. One of our clients requested that we add the ability to ship and track delivery of an order. Simple enough, right? Until just days before delivery, when a user asked, "And how do we create a split shipment?" I'm sorry, what? A what? That would have been nice to know. Okay. Another customer with a large payables department requested a productivity report that would break down by date how many expenses of which types were processed by whom. Only after we delivered it did the department manager mention that the report should only include individuals in her department with the specific role of AP clerk. That would have been a nice to know detail. Now, perhaps their reference to this as the clerk report should have been a tip-off to me, but I missed it. But I think it's also a great example of how a generally applicable report name, as in it usually is the clerks that are going to appear on here, from their perspective implied an unspoken expectation about what they were getting. So does anyone here recognize the common factor in both projects? Everyone's stumped completely, I can tell. All right. Bad in equals bad out. We've all seen it. So how can we avoid suffering from well-intentioned but insufficient or just plain bad requirements? Customers, they're going to be customers after all, right? We've all known them. To improve on our successes at Harmonix, we've embraced the design thinking process. Design thinking plays an essential role for us at Harmonix. Why, you must be asking? Well, it's because customers come to us for solutions to their problems, which requires us to be masters in the art of discerning the real problems. Design thinking enhances our insights into the project at hand, as well as the client. We're better able to understand our users and to correctly define their problems. The insights gained from incorporating user feedback provides us and our customers with a competitive advantage, not to mention an improved ability to manage expectations, theirs and ours. As you might expect, well-managed expectations increase value to the customer. More importantly, though, they improve the relationship and earn more of their trust for current and future projects. Now, may I be bold with you? And let me rephrase. I'm going to be bold. I feel strongly that design thinking should play an essential role in the life cycle of your projects as well. It's been our experience at Harmonic that prioritizing user-centric design principles and incorporating user feedback throughout a project's lifecycle creates more transparency and fosters better relationships with our customers. The proof, as they say, is in the pudding. We received this from the support staff liaison at one of our clients, an encouraging report of 100% satisfaction following a major new features release. That's 0 complaints from 3,000 users. Now, I don't know about you, but it's been my experience that this level of satisfaction is not achieved by happenstance. It takes work. I believe the successful outcome was a direct result of us having followed the design thinking principles. So what is this design thinking of which I speak? By a show of hands, don't be shy, how many here are familiar with design thinking? All right. How many make it a point to follow design thinking principles in all of your projects? I see a lot of this going on. Good to know. We're all on the same page, right? Of course, I could go on for hours discussing the user experience, in part because I'd hate to have that certification of mine go to waste. Fortunately for you, and more applicable to my presentation today, I will constrain myself to what I consider the jargon-free core fundamentals. Here's a simple way to think about it. The traditional approach to development asks, what can we build? The design thinking approach asks, what do users truly need? How best can we deliver it? And how can we improve the lives of our users? At its core, design thinking is about building the right product, not just building a product correctly. Design thinking in software development is an approach to problem solving that puts real users at the center of the process. Instead of starting with the technology or features, developers begin first by understanding the people who will actually use their software, their needs, frustrations, and goals. Then design around those insights. Design thinking also emphasizes iteration and continuous improvement. So why does this matter so much in software development? You probably all have answers of your own swimming around. Design thinking's focus is on solving the real problems that users actually have, which enables you to deliver more impactful results. The resulting workflows and interfaces are shaped by actual behavior, not assumptions, and developers are encouraged to explore multiple approaches. While implementations vary, design thinking is often described in 5 iterative stages or phases. Stage 1, often referred to as the empathy step, is where you'll do your research and learn about the users and their needs. This is best accomplished by interviewing and speaking with actual end users. Empathizing with the users enables you to better divine the problems so you can plan, which is stage 2. Next, we ideate, also known as design. Each phase of the design thinking process should include communication and feedback loops with the customer because it's essential to ensure that everyone is on the same page as the project proceeds. After ideation comes prototyping, which will undoubtedly spark new ideas. And finally, we test. I'm not talking here about the expected internal testing of our code. I hope we're all doing that. This step refers to usability testing by end users. This will invariably spark new ideas for the project, teach you more about the users and their needs, and reveal insights that redefine the problem. You see the kind of loop going on? Okay. It's easy to imagine that an iterative process looks like this, with your existing intake, communication, development, sharing, and training leading to a meeting of the minds. Happy place. Instead of a circular process, however, our experience with the design thinking process looks a bit more like this, where we begin with research, and based on our findings, we begin to plan and ideate, which sometimes requires follow-up interaction to clarify details or confirm assumptions. These findings get factored into our planning, and our ideation continues. Our ideas result in wireframes that we share and test. Feedback fuels more ideation, followed by low-fidelity prototyping and testing, then high-fidelity prototyping and more testing to validate, and more validation testing, prototyping, and yes, testing. It's a highly collaborative approach that yields better, more innovative solutions through the empathetic research of end users in order to fully and accurately understand their needs, planning based on the findings of our research, and a cycle of iterative ideation, prototyping, and testing. Moving on. You're no doubt more familiar with the development sequence that looks something like this, with planning and development phases that logically and progressively build on one another from project conception to completion. In design thinking speak, these are known as the 5 planes of UX. The strategy plane essentially covers your information gathering and brainstorming. I'm sure you're all familiar with scope, the documentation of agreed features and functionality. Structure represents the architecture and how the features will work. The skeleton represents your wireframes and the prototypes you'll create for feedback and approvals. And as you've probably guessed, the last plane, surface, represents your final UI and UX. So in some senses, it's not that different from the progress, the way we go through a project currently, if you think about it like this. But don't forget about the user. Okay, so the 5 planes are familiar to you, if not by name, certainly by your experience as a FileMaker developer. So how do the 5 stages of the design thinking process inform a project strategy, scope, structure, skeleton, and surface? Good thing you're here. But more importantly, why do we care? Here's why. Author, poet, and activist Maya Angelou once said, "People will forget what you said and did, but not how you made them feel." This is why we care. If asked how they feel while using your solutions, how do you think your own users would respond? Is it possible that they might feel frustrated, impatient, or misunderstood? Shouldn't they be feeling enabled, productive, and heard? Of course they should. So where do we as developers go wrong? Perhaps our understanding of the issues that need to be solved is too vague. Or we've been swayed by a client's or even our own assumptions. Developers are often too disconnected from the users, and as a result, our QA is more likely to be validating the wrong things. Not to worry though. Design thinking can give your development process the edge it needs so your users will feel more positive about what you deliver. In this section, I'll share the process, logic, and tools that I use to translate the fruits of design thinking into successful deliverables. There are numerous design thinking tools and techniques you could implement, from empathy maps and user journeys to metric gathering test models. Indeed, there are any number of jargon-filled approaches that we're not going to talk about today. They're available to guide you toward the goal of satisfying your customer. For the purpose of this presentation, however, I'm going to focus specifically on what I consider the most primary of tools. Employed as intended, these are not only part of the design thinking process, they can also provide you with valuable project deliverables. During phase 1 of the design thinking process, which I remind you is empathy and research, we identify the needs of our users and their related requirements, and these are best documented in the form of user stories. During phase 2, planning, we define the features and functionality necessary to support our user stories. And during our final phase, testing, which is after ideating and prototyping. I'm not skipping them, I just don't need to talk about those. That's where your creativity comes in. We'll verify that the features and functionality we planned do in fact meet the needs of our users, functioning as intended and expected. Now imagine that you have just completed your best, most empathetic research in order to actually identify the needs of your users. You're armed with a plethora of meeting notes and recordings, feedback, and you're genuinely excited by the prospects of how much you're going to improve their lives. Kudos to you. That is terrific. You're partway there. But how will you organize and summarize all that valuable information collected on your quest? You, as the developer, and your client as the beneficiary of your efforts are both well served by transforming that knowledge into user stories. If this were a workshop session, this is the moment where I'd ask you all to take your paper, pad that I've given you, and the pencil I've provided to draw me a comfortable chair. You're all looking at me like I've gone off the deep end here. Why would I want you to do that? Because I can guarantee you that no two chairs drawn in this room would look the same. And why do I care that your idea of a comfortable chair probably isn't the same as mine? It's because overgeneralizing user needs can lead to avoidable assumptions and costly, very costly misdirection. If you're asked to deliver a comfortable chair, what does that actually mean? A user story is essentially a short, simple description of an action or behavior told from the perspective of the person who desires the new capability, usually a user or customer of the system. A good user story is a brief narrative that paints a sufficiently accurate picture of a specific feature or functionality. It is descriptive enough so the user who wants an egg chair will get an egg chair and not a porch swing. I didn't look for a porch swing. I figured you'd understand. It also specifies who wants the egg chair and why, but it's generally devoid of technical detail. Now, this is why user stories are so important. They keep focus on the user, pushing you to think about their real needs, not just technical features. They improve communication because stories are simple and non-technical. Everyone can understand what's being done and why. They also promote collaboration because they're often discussed and further refined with your client and/or development team, encouraging input and shared ownership. Stories are lightweight and easy to adjust without the overhead of major documentation changes, so they support flexibility as a project iterates and evolves. And they connect your work to actual outcomes. Each story includes a goal, which helps everyone understand the value being delivered. So if someone on your team is assigned a task with the user story, they understand why they're doing it. It's not just another technical task that's been assigned to them. They understand the purpose and why and the value. And for extra credit, consider creating personas to go with your user stories. Linett. Now, let's review the structure for framing your findings as user stories. This is the most basic template for a user story. As a someone, I either want or need something so that something else becomes possible. Said in other words, as someone in a specific role, I want to achieve a specific goal of some sort so that I can enjoy one or more benefits. I, the user, probably also have some conditions for the goal and benefits I expect to receive. For example, as an account manager, I want this particular type of sales report sent for a specific reason. And for this report, I happen to have some specific requirements as detailed in my user stories acceptance criteria. Next, we'll need to decide on the feature or features necessary to enable and implement our sample user story. To deliver on our sample user story, we'll obviously need a sales report designed from the expected context with the required content. Because this is expected to be generated and sent automatically, a reporting mechanism or engine will also be needed to handle scheduling, processing, and sending of the report. For this example, I've identified two supporting features, the sales report and reporting engine, one of which includes multiple functional requirements and expectations. After the features are built, structured test plans allow you to ensure that your work not only performs as you intend, but it actually meets user expectations. Each of your agreed features will require testing, and sometimes it will be best to follow task-specific test plans, multiples of them, because all functionality being delivered by a promised feature needs to be verifiable and repeatable, both by your internal QA and by end users. To accomplish this, the quality of your test plans is essential. So let's look at an actual real-world structured test plan. I'm sure you'd all agree that few features would be well served by a test plan that simply says push the new button. Have anyone ever seen a test plan like that? I have. Am I right? Am I right? Now, in this example, and I know it's small to read, just trust me, and you can watch the recording and zoom later if you'd like to know more. All right. First off, for this example, the specific feature being tested by the plan has been specified. And for reference by the tester, who, by the way, should not be anyone who was involved with the development. If they did any of the code, they shouldn't be the one testing. Okay? That's been so. And so for reference by the tester, who may be responsible for performing numerous test plans, it also indicates which among the one to potentially many plans that we're looking at. Keeping in mind that a well-written test plan provides the tester with more than just the simple steps associated with performing a particular task, push the new button. Test plans should include applicable specs such as who is the test user? If the functionality, for example, needs to work for users with limited privileges, this should be indicated so that it can be tested while using those limited privileges. Might the tester encounter any applicable rules that they should be aware of? Like this feature only works on Wednesdays. Don't test on Wednesday. Okay? Are there any downstream implications of the testing to note? If, for example, populating invalid date on the third step could impact the billing module and launch bad juju via PSOS, that would be pretty important detail for your tester to know. Essentially, if new functionality has the potential to impact existing, even seemingly unrelated functionality, it may also be necessary to retest some of your existing features. A test plan should describe the scenario in which a user would be performing these steps. What's the context of this task? And are there any preparation steps required by the tester? Might a specific type of record be required, for example? The test plan should describe what a positive outcome looks like, and when applicable, the possible or most likely negative outcomes. Does something different happen if invalid data is entered by the user? And when functionality includes error trapping feedback, this should be evaluated as well, which means you should have a test plan that verifies that it fails as expected. And finally, the test plan should describe the expected verifiable results per step when applicable, and in my own personal opinion, preferably with screenshots. We love the screenshots. We as in me, I love the screenshots. Okay, moving on. Clearly, project size is a factor and your mileage may vary, but the effort required to manage your findings and ensure that you're following through can be substantial. When I first began following an intentional design thinking process myself, I used the old school method of writing user stories and their requirements on index cards. During the planning stage of a project, I could quite literally reposition, group, and prioritize these just about anywhere. That's assuming, of course, that my anywhere had sufficient surface area. Hundreds of note cards. Okay. Index cards do remain an entirely valid, simple, and versatile tool, but as you might imagine, as a FileMaker developer, I thought they had some limitations. Limitations that surely I could eliminate. The first of these was the effort required to ensure that each of my user stories had at least one supporting feature. Nothing gets left out. While correspondingly needing to ensure that each feature was aware of all the various user stories that it was expected to support. Of course, we all know connections like these are simple to handle in FileMaker. Not so much working with physical index cards or memory, especially for some of us who shall go unnamed, like me. Okay, so my schema for what I built is quite simple with only the tables necessary to support my primary tools: projects, user stories, features, test plans, and the test steps. My graph is similarly plain, with direct relationships from a project to its user stories and its features, plus the obvious secondary relationships so that each can be aware of the other, and with test plans related directly from the features being tested. So what are some of the tangible advantages from having built our own solution? Naturally, I do use it for all the reasons I built it in the first place: collecting, linking, organizing, and generating discovery deliverables while delivering reliable functionality to our customers. The features that we've included in our tool are an excellent source of reference with built-in accountability. The ability to create structured test plans has allowed us to improve our QA processes and better integrate them into our development lifecycle. And our tool includes multiple options to assist us in generating reports for sharing internally or with clients. For example, I wanted the option to readily share with our customers the features we had planned for them, along with references to the specific user stories supported by each. I also wanted the ability to provide our customers with documentation of the user stories we agreed to include, together with references to their supporting features, of course. This would allow me to provide our customers with the confirmation and feedback of what we had learned from our discussions and observations, while allowing them to review and confirm the direction we intended to take on their behalf. And for this particular project, adding a feature named Future Episodes allowed me to document 100% of the user stories we discussed without committing to all of them being covered by the current scope. I thought that was pretty cool. But why do I consider this a tangible advantage? I'm so glad I asked, and I'm even happier that you're all here for the answer. The examples I just shared with you were originally prepared for a Jersey-based truck repair shop that specializes in, as you can see here, very large trucks. Now, while I'm pretty confident that no one else here in the room has worked with this particular kind of client, that particular business, I'm sure that in your experiences, you probably encountered similarly afflicted prospects like ours. They were originally woefully suffering from WBS, which we now recognize as wounded buyer syndrome. An unfortunate developer experience in the past had left them a bit weary and approval shy. But with the help of our user stories tool, we were able to provide them with clear documentation of the results from our discovery phase, including 67 unique user stories and 22 supporting feature requirements. This bolstered their confidence and reinforced that we had indeed listened. We understood what we heard, and we were able to successfully translate their needs into specific features with documented expectations. Most importantly, the documentation itself further enhanced their confidence in our professionalism, helping to ease any lingering concerns. And for the benefit of both parties, the documentation also served to define the agreed scope of our first major project. Now let's take a look at the actual workflow that I follow when using our FileMaker tool. And by the way, everything that I develop has good-looking icons. Just, you don't need to compliment, I know. Okay. The file opens directly to the projects list, where selecting a project takes me directly to that project's user stories panel. As indicated in the header, I am now on the list view of my stories module. My design was based on a very simple model, which considerably reduced the effort required to build it. The primary UI literally consists of two nested slide control panels where my context is always the selected project. Selecting the Edit button for any user story takes me to the Edit panel of my Stories module. I also have the option to view a Details panel that includes various versions of the user story that are pre-formatted and ready for a quick copy and paste to wherever I might want to use them. And the last panel in my Stories module, Summaries, is among the most valuable for documentation. In fact, it's the source used for the project scope deliverable that we saw just a few slides back. I literally just copied and pasted from here. User stories are added here, with each element of the basic user story template entered separately, then merged into a final format by the tool. So in this example, as the admin, I either want or need to have or allow something to happen, in this case, retain the current CRM for contact info, so that some benefit is achieved. And if you were looking closely and quickly, you may have noticed that I phrased the benefits descriptions so that the assembled user story would read naturally. As the admin, I need to retain the current CRM so that I and my team can enjoy the specified benefits. Selecting the Features module takes me directly to the features list, as one might expect, having already experienced the Stories module. Here, I can select Copy to capture for pasting the formatted details of a specific feature, including its related user stories. Or I can select Edit to provide completion criteria, feature attributes, and relevant background details, if any. Also, from the Features Edit view, I can begin to prepare for the required test plans. The List tab provides two versions of the project's list of features. The first is a numbered list of features, followed by a version that includes IDs for the supported user stories. The Features with Attributes tab is as described. The last Features List tab combines details from the previous two, and the Features Summary tab provides the same formatted report as the Stories module. The Compare panel is where I can view a project's user stories and features together, which makes it the perfect location for pairing them up. I first read the user story, then I open its popover to select all of the appropriate features. If a needed feature doesn't exist yet, I can quickly add it without leaving this panel. I can, of course, add new features directly from the features list, but to ensure that all user stories are in fact covered, remember that whole crossed lines with the index cards is part of why I built this in the first place. So to ensure that all user stories are covered, I prefer to add supporting features from the Compare view where the user stories are also present. This allows me to quickly add a feature if needed based on the details of a specific user story. And once a feature's been added, I can then relate any number of user stories to it. I can also build on a feature's completion criteria based on the details of each newly assigned user story. And thanks to a touch of conditional formatting, I'm able to quickly identify which user stories remain to be paired. I do love conditional formatting. What would we do without it? Okay, so to set up a test plan, we can navigate directly to the Test Plans module where you can see all of the test plans belonging to your current project. My preferred navigation, however, is to enter directly from the feature that I'm writing a test plan for. That makes more sense to me. From there, I can add or choose from a feature-specific list of test plans, and I have immediate reminders from my test plan template of the various and plentiful details that I may want or need to include or that have been requested by Christopher. This is also where I enter the actual instructions and expected results for each step. And when I'm ready to forward my test plan to Christopher in QA, I simply select PDF. All of the test plan specs are formatted and appear on the first page of the test plan, along with references to the specific feature being tested and which of the potentially multiple test plans this one happens to be, as I mentioned earlier. And on page 2 and beyond, the steps continue along with their images. Here, the Test Plan Details tab includes fields for following the test plan template with all of the details that I've mentioned so far. And I've made extensive use of the placeholder text for clarity, so anyone on our team can use this tool and understand what's expected when they write test plans for their features. Taking a closer look here, you'll see an actual example of a potential negative path. The individual steps, as I already said, are entered on the Test Plan Steps tab, and naturally, each step can have multiple of its own images, which are added here, but can also be viewed individually in a separate resizable window. Because, those are really small. Now, because I'm working with FileMaker, I always enjoy opportunities to expand on the original functionality of our user stories tool. And I see our options evolving right along with FileMaker. We happen to use UTrack for project management. So one of the first options I added was a direct link from a feature in our tool to open its related UTrack ticket. And another option I added was the ability to estimate the level of effort for each feature with a corresponding project level estimate, of course, because I could. I've also incorporated some stats that allow me to quickly spot potentially missing details from my features. Our internal FileMaker-based timekeeping system is already integrated, so the time spent working on a ticket is always current when we look at it in UTrack. But that's just the beginning. I expect it won't be long before we're adding new UTrack tickets directly from our user stories tool. And in case you didn't catch this earlier, the content that I can currently copy from a feature with a single click is not coincidentally an exact match to what I want to see in UTrack. I would also like to have the current assignees and ticket states seamlessly available from our tool. I've also been keen to employ AI-assisted conversions of both internal QA test plan content to end-user appropriate test plan content and test plan content to end-user documentation. Now, at this point in my Toronto presentation, I did a recap of design thinking benefits, but I've since had the opportunity to do some impressive things with AI, so it's with the hope that you too may be inspired by the possibilities that I will instead use my remaining time to share some of what I've learned. As you know, I was already quite interested in the prospects of using AI to generate end-user documentation from our test plan content. So when I found myself needing to confirm that everything that we promised by a project scope for a new system was in fact present, and knowing that that scope was defined by its user stories, I considered this the perfect opportunity to test AI's viability as a meaningful partner. But when this justifiable opportunity to play presented itself, I also happened to have another potential source of content in a set of Loom videos that had been recorded for the customer. These were demonstration videos that we'd prepared. So I tested the results from each source, from the transcripts of the Loom videos and from the content of our test plans. And both technically checked all the boxes, but I much preferred the transcript-based results. This was perhaps due to the more conversational nature of the videos. In any event, I found their documentation results more thorough. This is the actual value list chapter, based primarily on what I remind you was a lengthy 1.5-minute video. It clearly supplemented with related references from other demonstration videos that touched on the same topic. I like that. The results also included unexpected features, like a table of keyboard shortcuts, cross-references, and a separate troubleshooting section. My actual AI prompt was quite simple and had not requested any of these extras. With the end user documentation as my evidence of existing functionality, my next task was to compare this against the original set of user stories. Again, a simple prompt was all I needed. The results, however, took forever. Did you hear that? Forever. Instead of the near instant results I'd come to expect from AI, it took nearly 2 full minutes to generate the comparison. Can you imagine? The primary conclusion, however, stated clearly in the first sentence of the summary, was the result I'd hoped for. But there was more. Each fully covered user story included a meaningful documentation reference, and instances were called out separately where deviations existed between the intent of a story and its documentation. That meant the AI had to understand its intent, which, again, I was impressed. Okay, so explanations were included for each of these discrepancies or potential discrepancies, allowing me to decide if changes were warranted, whether to the documentation, the app, or, as in this case, neither. One story had been classified as covered even though the documentation had no reference to the story's specifically referenced image type. In this case, coverage was inferred and the story was called out with a full explanation again, so I was aware in case a change was in order. And last but not least, a brief list of recommendations was provided for my consideration before finalizing my documentation. The documentation was originally generated for the sole purpose of comparing its content to the promised user stories, but I was so pleased with the results that we ended up delivering it right along with the videos. Now, they say time is money, and they're not wrong. So let's get to the meat of it. The videos, which totaled just over an hour of content, took about 2.5 hours to produce. The documentation itself took a mere 3 minutes to generate. Now, this was after the 30 or so that I spent compiling the 31 transcripts, and before the hour or so that I spent reading through the results. So a few hours were invested in producing the 31 videos plus 20 pages of companion documentation. Compare this to the week it probably would have taken for me to write the same volume of new documentation. I'd say the reduction in effort was substantial. There was really just one issue that I encountered with the documentation. The clean formatting and organization that was visible in my AI conversation, bold text, headers, subtext, bullet and numbered list, tables, etc., were not retained when I pasted them directly to a Pages document. I discovered, however, that these were retained when pasted to Evernote. So my workaround was to paste first into Evernote, then to copy paste from there to Pages. Still, too much time was spent applying acceptable styling to the final document. And I know there are solutions for that, but that wasn't the intent of my experiment here. My next opportunity to play with AI involved writing user stories for the upgrade of an existing client module. And I should mention that considerable thought had already gone into my vision for the redesign before bringing AI on board to assist. My goal here was to determine the extent to which AI could improve efficiency and how I might choose to integrate it into our existing user stories tool. For this project, I began again with fairly simple prompts to generate a set of what I expected would be more pretty basic user stories. First, I needed a filtered list, plus a few other options, and another view with some more granular options. Naturally, as many of us do, along the way I realized I'd left out some important details, so a bit of refinement was needed here and there. I was also interested to see what it might learn from the mock-ups I'd been working on, so I shared those too. I was impressed by some of the more subtle details it was able to garner from these images. Then somewhere along the way, it occurred to me that I'd left out a pretty big detail about our designs. I had to mention that we were using interactive web viewers and not a traditional FileMaker layout on objects. The resulting story themselves were sometimes surprisingly complete given the simplicity of my prompts. It became clear at times that it was using knowledge gained from earlier stories. And I really appreciated that it created simple titles and applied them to the template conforming stories. What I did not expect, that truly blew me away for the first time I was doing this, from the very first story, was the automatic inclusion of acceptance criteria with every story. After the stories were written, the project was organized into epics for me. And I was offered project estimating, which was, of course, accompanied by detailed explanations. And I tried out a handful more of some potentially useful options. After I added some meeting notes, it summarized the impacts for me, then updated and appended my list of user stories. I was offered both an executive summary of the project as well as an at-a-glance version. Needless to say, I was impressed. I've used that word a lot. I need to stop being so impressed with AI. That's its job, right? But first time in doing this, I was impressed. As I stated earlier, though, considerable thought had already gone into the redesign. So sure, my AI colleague did offer some ideas that I hadn't considered. Plus, it generated the comprehensive acceptance criteria on my behalf and some other goodies for me. But what if, and I'm just pondering here, what if you're here, still needing to organize and summarize all that valuable information you have? You don't even have user stories yet. You just have the wealth of knowledge that exists nowhere but all over the place. Well, you're in luck, because you can use content from whatever sources you already have to generate your user stories. And as I shared earlier, AI can use transcripts from your meetings to point out any new, removed, or refined requirements. So as your project is moving along and you're getting feedback, let AI do that work for you. If you aren't already recording your project meetings, I highly recommend that you start doing so immediately. And I think you may be surprised, as I was, by the refinements that can result from also sharing your sketches, wireframes, or prototypes. As for the results you can expect, the options are seemingly endless. But before you share anything project or client related with an LLM, I urge you to consider what is and is not appropriate to share and where. For a deeper discussion on this, I refer you to the various AI-related discussions from some of our prior FMPUG meetings. I also encourage you to strike up a conversation with our meeting sponsor, Mike from Zerowait. User stories can be written using the standard design thinking template, which is represented here by our first bullet, or any other preferred format. User stories can be grouped or detailed to meet and include your preferences. Per story additions can be incorporated or not. Again, it's your choice. And if you want to see some FileMaker specific context and recommendations, be sure to let the LLM know that your system is being written for a FileMaker system. Now, had I said yes to every option offered by my AI partner, my second project would have quickly resembled the never-ending story. It nearly did. Not every offering or option was needed or even appropriate for the project's current stage, but it was my experience, and you'll probably find this as well, that the more you interact, the more options you're likely to be offered. Some additions, like these, were available while I was writing my user stories. Others became available after they'd been written, like refinements, specific downstream deliverables, and there are endless new deliverables that AI can also provide. But my original goal here was to determine the extent to which AI could improve efficiency and how I might be able to integrate it into our existing user stories tool. So, what did I conclude about the efficiency of using AI to write user stories? Well, the basic stories themselves were written during my first hour. That was great. Add to that about 3 hours over the course of the next few days spent expanding details and making refinements. Now, you might be thinking, I could easily pen 10 to 14 user stories in 1 to 4 hours, and you bet your bippy I could. But could I, within that same time, organize them into a previously undefined group of logical epics, prepare 105 applicable user acceptance criteria, write multiple versions of an executive summary for the project represented by the stories, define actual and likely dependencies, estimate level of effort, identify potential development bottlenecks, plus ferret out and begin tracking open questions. Not a chance. And I doubt anyone here, as good as some of us are, could do that in 4 hours. So, speaking only for myself, the most meaningful value of having partnered with AI to write these user stories for this particular project was not the template compliant results that were generated for me. It was everything else. It was everything else that AI did for the project. And on this front, I considered the effort exceptionally efficient. Another example from Harmonic's team that I'll share with you briefly was contributed by Paul Mitchell. He spent, and I quote, very little time providing AI with the transcripts from multiple discovery meetings, after which he was able to import 288 user stories to our internal tool in very little time. Now, as you'll recall, to ensure that anyone could use it and understand what was expected, our tool uses the basic template logic to build user stories. With AI generating fully formatted stories, this might no longer seem necessary, but I didn't want to break or modify hundreds of existing stories in our system. So I simply asked AI to split its user stories into export-ready columns for me, which it did happily and quickly. With that effort having been successful, I knew I'd want to do it again, so I asked how. I was promptly provided with a reusable breakdown prompt, along with input and output examples, which, by the way, I've shared with Paul already, so he can do the same. So I now had the ability to partner with AI to generate user stories that were compatible with and importable to our user stories tool. But the AI had delivered so much more information that I found useful that I updated our tool to include a few more data points, like the story title, description, acceptance criteria, and summary. And here you can see how nicely the AI-generated acceptance criteria fits right in with our existing format without me having to make any changes. Now, we've already integrated private LLMs for multiple clients, and our own LibreChat already has an MCP server for UTrack in place. So by integrating our LLM with the user stories tool, we'll be able to make updates and additions more directly and with fewer tokens. And for more specific conversation about that, I direct you to other people. Thank you for your time and attention. I hope it was good for you too. Now would be a great time to scan the QR code for our post-event survey and to ask all those burning questions you must have.